Alright, Genshin has one too many Pyro DPS, all of them do the same thing really, and they also happen to most of the time use the same units. So let's get this sorted and talk about all the Pyro DPS and who is the best, taking into account all the pros, cons, flexibility, damage, and quality of life. Hello there, Flip here, and today we are going to be evaluating the Pyro damage dealers, ranking them from best to worst to best. But before we do that, as always, if at any point during the video you're entertained or informed, make sure to drop a like and even consider subscribing, as I talk on various topics regarding Genshin's meta, and I'll try to keep you updated. And with that, let's begin. Actually no, that's a lie, let's not begin, because we first need to set ground rules. We are going to be assuming that every 4 star is at C6 and every 5 star is at C0. Next, I am not going to be including Ling on the list, because the discussion around her is mostly down to how much you value that she's able to do all her damage while field, and I don't think it leads to a very interesting discussion. Lastly, DPS isn't going to be the only factor, as one thing a lot of the Pyro characters have in common is that they all have gameplay issues, so even if a character theoretically can output more damage than another, if they can't actually reach that level of damage very consistently, then I don't think it's extremely reasonable to rank them higher than another unit that can be more consistent. And now with all of that out of the way, let's actually begin. Starting at dead fucking last, Yoimiya. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, I could make an entire video about how bad Yoimiya is because she has so many flaws and gameplay issues, on top of being single target locked, not having access to Zhonyan for plunge vapes, not having that much damage theoretically, and in practice it's so easy for her to be screwed over. At a base, Yoimiya has no built-in interruption resistance or any defensive utility for that matter, coupled in with the fact that her combos are backloaded, so her last normal attack does significantly more damage than her first. And if you're using her on a vape team, her ICD lines up with her normal attack string, so you vape the strongest hits, but if you dodge or get interrupted and restart her combo, you will now mess up her ICD alignment and vape her weaker hits. So yeah, have fun. Yoi's range is also extremely overrated, as she has very bad tracking anyways, so even if you do find an enemy like the Thundering Manifestation or Wolf Lord, you will still miss a lot. And she also moves back when doing her combos, which makes her tracking worse, and if you're running her with Bennett, then she'll move out of Bennett's circle. I'm actually getting mad just thinking about this character. Also, I'm not done yapping yet. Another thing is that certain characters can improve the more you get better, as you can learn new combos or ways to use them. With Hu Tao, for example, there's a drastic difference from spamming normal attacks to being able to do her jump cancels. Yoimiya doesn't have that. Other than artifact, weapon, and constellation investment, you can literally not get any more damage out of your Yoimiya. And for all of those reasons, I just think there's no other place you can put her than in dead last. Next, we have every melee character that's able to use Zhonyan and a C6 Bennett. Plunge Vape comps are obviously a gimmick team, but despite that, they are very strong and don't have that many flaws, and actually have a lot going for them. First, the plunge multiplier is innately the highest scaling giving to a character. They also get buffed a fuck ton by Zhonyan, on top of artifact sets like VV or Song of Days Past. And since you have Furina on the team, you also get to enable the Hunter set. Because plunges are such a high multiplier and you get to vape it, this leads to screenshot damage that is actually consistent. Additionally, you have collision plunges that give you an extra instance of damage in single target. Plunges also cover you in a 360-degree radius, so you have AoE in your kit, unlike some certain other characters. Lastly, you have some pretty solid defensive utility while plunging. You can get hit and knocked on the way up, which sucks, but on the way down you can't get hit out of your plunge, and you also are able to avoid enemy attacks while in the air, and plunges do a lot of stagger damage, meaning you can just stun lock some enemies into never damaging you. There are also dash or normal attack cancels you can do to plunge faster, which is nice. For the cons, it does require having a C6 Bennett. Also, outside of your damage window, you kind of just have to idly sit there. Furina's pets also apply Hydro in an RNG way, so there will be some times where you can just plunge spam and vape everything, and sometimes where you have to slow down your tempo to accommodate. The double swirl setups for this team can also be really cringe if you want to push its highest theoretical DPS, but you can just use Song of Days Past to avoid this. In conclusion, what I'm really trying to say is that Fremine is a better Pyro DPS than Yoimiya. 7th on the list is Yanfei. Numbers wise, she is going to be theoretically the lowest DPS option in single target because of her very egregious energy needs. Bursting every rotation consistently would require an ER stands on most of her teams, which would just kill her damage, so the trade-off is that you have to burst every other rotation, so she'll feel extremely potent basically half the time. Energy is her only real downside at C6, because outside of that, in terms of playability, Yanfei has tons of built-in quality of life, and is the easiest to pilot out of all the Pyro damage dealers from my playtesting. Yanfei is a catalyst user, which would normally spell disaster for a charge attack playstyle. However, at a base she gets 45% 5% stamina reduction, and with C1 it's 100%, which keeps her in line with the melee characters. She also doesn't need to dash for any of her combos either, as the DPS gain is minimal, and she can just stay rooted in place actually, because with her C4 you get a shield, and she also has increased resistance to interruption when doing your charge attacks. The traits of the best lawyer next to Saul Goodman don't end there, by the way, as she has another big positive, and that is a big AoE front load. Her Force Seal charge attack has an AoE directly in front of her, so does her burst cast, her elemental skill, and she gets an additional pyro AoE when you crit with her charge attack. All of which can be vaped very quickly with a combo like this, which gets out a lot of damage very quickly. I can touch a bit more on her teams now, but it's pretty much only vape. She has multiple big hits, all of which can be set up for a vaporize, so just use her there. Her base numbers aren't that impressive, so for Chevru's teams or Mono Pyro, she won't feel that particularly amazing. And with that, there's nothing much to say. Yanfei is a solid, comfy DPS you should try out, and now let's move on to the next characters. On the complete opposite end of comfy, we have Klee. Depending on how much you factor in playability, Klee can honestly go lower than this, but when you do get down Klee's playstyle, she boasts a great amount of raw damage across all Pyro team archetypes, while having adaptable rotations and very good AoE too, on top of having high stagger and juggling potential to stunlock enemies. For teams, you of course have the standard Mono Pyro setup along with the Klee Rina variant. She has okay double Hydra teams where she can vape upwards of 70% of her CAs, which hit like a truck, so just basically spam N1 charge attack in these teams. And if you're against rune guards or bosses that don't move, then Klee Chevru's teams are also fine. But I'm a lot more inclined to recommending the other stuff. Klee doesn't really have that many pros other than her flexibility. Her range isn't that great, she uses the baby model so she doesn't travel far, and if the enemy looks at you with a slight hint of malice, she goes flying. Klee still does enough damage on a multitude of teams to warrant her placements above Yanfei and Yoimiya, and alas, here she is. When talking about the greatest redemption arcs in fiction, some would point to Zuko here. Some would point to Sasuke, and Giga Chads would point to Subaru or Thorfinn. However, as the Genshin nerd I am, I'm going to be talking about the one who regained his grace through Birdmom, Diluc. I've already talked about all the strengths of Plunge team, so I'm not going to reiterate them, as that is Diluc's only good team, but he does have advantages over the other Plunge damage dealers with the fact that he has the highest Plunge multipliers out of the options, unless you want to count Femine who gets slightly higher with constellations, but shut the fuck up. Additionally, if you just need to finish enemies off and don't want to commit to an entire rotation, then you can just play standard Diluc, who is able to be the janitor sweeping up low health enemies and saving you some stress. Diluc is over the other options because Plunge Vape teams are very strong. Diluc is one of the best Plunge damage dealers. Scroll back to my Plunge section, I already talk about why it's so good. I don't know what you want from me. Breaking into the top 4, we have a tie because since this character isn't out yet, I don't want to give any ultimatums if she's better or worse than a character we've been playtesting for months now. And I am talking about both Gaming and Arlecchino, because depending on how good Father feels to play, she will either end up being higher or lower than Gaming. I made a video talking about all the flaws with Arlecchino, which were due to the fact that she can't be healed externally, has almost no defensive utility in her base kit, and her attacks had very little AoE. Good thing to know that one thing changed, and that is that Arlie's attack now have an increased radius, making her a competent AoE damage dealer, which is actually just really good. Thank you, Hoyoverse. But she still has massive defensive issues which can't be ignored, whilst also having Yoimiya syndrome to where she wants to do her full attack string to reach her highest multipliers. Now for Gaming, he's just another Plunge unit. I literally talked about Plunge twice, so yeah. Gaming is a lot more flexible as he isn't reliant on Junyan for his plunges during his burst, allowing you to slot him into things like Chevru's, Mono Pyro, or Double Hydro, which is a massive plus and why I have him over Diluc. However, do you know that he gets quite a lot of value from constellations, primarily his C4 and C6, so he's going to feel quite a bit worse without them. Alluding to his C4, his energy issues can also get pretty bad, so build a decent amount of ER on him and funnel with Bennett. Lastly, some of his kit is RNG because why not have more luck on top of your gacha? This repulsive thing Manchai can fuck you over on non-Junyan teams, making you have to delay your plunges, which sucks. And again, you run into the Furina issue to where you can either get good Furina RNG and game all over your enemies with your thick sword and plunges, or you get bad Furina RNG and need to do an extra rotation. And unlike Diluc, who can do solid damage outside of his window, Gaming doesn't have the luxury for cleaning up most of the time. So on a damage basis, Arlecchino will be more consistent as you don't have that extra layer of RNG, and just for piloting the character, Gaming will feel better, as he most likely won't just die. And we still need to playtest Arlecchino to see how bad her gameplay issues end up being, so again she will either be above or below Gaming as the 3rd or 4th best Pyro DPS. Okay, we have 2 more characters left, and the arguments surrounding these characters are some of the most toxic. So between Lyney and Hu Tao, who will take 2nd place? Drumroll please. Actually cut it, that sounds annoying as fuck. 2nd place goes to Hu Tao. Hu Tao does have 3 main cons, with the fact that she's tied to Vape, stamina management at C0 can be a pain, and she's very single target oriented on non-Janyon teams. But none of these things hinder her gameplay massively, and unlike Yoimiya, her single target damage is one of the best in the game regardless. Another positive is that Hu Tao kills herself to get loaded up on a fuck ton of attack, and therefore she can run Bennetless teams a lot more comfortably than the other units. Before talking about some of her flaws more, I want to say another underrated aspect about Hu Tao is how consistently quick her damage can come out. With the normal attackers, you have to ramp up, which is why dodging also sucks because you then reset your chain to its weaker attacks. And for Lyney, who I'm about to talk about, you have to like wind up his charged attack. But in Hu Tao's case, her charge attack is what you're going to be spamming and it comes out extremely quickly. So even if you have to dodge or get staggered, it isn't a massive deficit to her damage. Now yes, Hu Tao is somewhat mechanically challenging through her dash and jump cancels, and you also want to have good stamina management, which is why you do jump cancels at C0 most of the time, and chasing enemies with Hu Tao can be very annoying. Janyon does help with most of these issues as you can just jump to get a good amount of distance to chase enemies, and it makes jump cancels feel less stiff, as it immediately takes you to another action. Though not everyone has Janyon, so be mindful that if you want an easier character to just unga bunga with, you may just have a better experience with someone like the Knave. Speaking of which, the reason why I do have Hu Tao above the other options is due to the fact that I think you can just get a lot out of her mechanically, more so than the characters below her. You have like level 1 Hu Tao players which are just doing uncancelled charge attacks, level 2 would be doing jump or dash cancels, and then you can go beyond this to squeeze out more damage. Yes, Hu Tao is single target oriented, but if you delay your cancel, you can line up enemies and knock them over. There's things like the PP slide mechanic, ignore the name, where Hu Tao won't lose her skill buff until the animation of her charge attack concludes, so if you use her burst after her last charge attack, you can get a backloaded nuke on her burst, cheating out more damage, which is helpful for clearing the last part of enemy health bars. Another thing is weaving in dash cancels alongside your jump cancels at C0, as they're faster, so if the bosses are stationary like in Weena's case, that's like 10 to 50% boost to your DPS right there. No other Pyro DPS has this level of skill expression except like Klee, I guess, but because Hu Tao is less end-like on her animation, she feels more fluid to play, on top of generally having higher DPS and better clears than Klee. So yes, Hu Tao rightfully deserves a spot as the 2nd best Pyro damage dealer. Now I don't need to stall, the only last option to pick from is Amber, the femboy one. Lyney only really has 2 cons, one of which is shared by a lot of characters being Bennett reliance, and the other is he happens to have the worst playstyle in the game, being a charge attack bow DPS. I guess in his case it's not the worst thing ever because he has a pretty strong taunt. He also gets so many free stats that his shielded teams don't have a massive fall off, and his skill and burst are pretty strong regardless, both of which are just button presses. The uglier twin also deceptively has a lot of team options for cores. You have Furina stuff, Chevrolet stuff, Mono Pyro, Double Geo, hell, literally anything as long as you have Bennett. Just these 2 alone are so ugly that the enemies will kill themselves out of sheer terror. Okay, no more trolling, but he is very flexible. His rotations are also extremely flexible. You can just immediately burst in skill to frontload, or you can do his full 3CA combo for bosses and sustained fights. Very good single target, very respectable AoE, not really burst reliant, and can clean up outside of his main damage window for extra quality of life. You do even get some skill expression with him in things like pre-stacking, so you can get a powerful skill without having to charge attack in Bennett's ring. I definitely underrated how strong Lyney was, but as of now he very consistently does the most damage out of all the Pyro options, and the reason I have him over Hu Tao is mostly due to front-loaded AoE damage being super valuable, where we have bosses with tight windows or elite enemies that could just be one-shot by him. So to recite the list, we have Yoimiya at the bottom, any generic plunge carry, Yanfei, Klee, Diluc, then Gaming or Arlecchino, Hu Tao, and Lyney to top the list, despite the fact that he's definitely a bottom. And that's enough of me. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts on who you think the best Pyro DPS are, as I'd love to hear, and I respond to almost every single comment. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. Peace.